v0.18.0, Marian Anderson. There's a couple really exciting things to say. One thing that I can't say just yet, but we should be able to announce very soon, is an actual release candidate that you all can pip install onto your machines and give a go. There is a beta that we released a couple weeks ago. It has a couple of these features, not all of them. So just sit tight and stay tuned for the release candidate, which is going to have everything that I'm about to talk about. In the meantime, we're going to talk about it now. There are some docs to read and some more conversations to have. So there are two, which I'm extending into three because I think it's such a big deal, but three really big things coming in the next release. A more extensible framework for macros that you want to be implemented different ways on different databases, new and advanced node selection syntax, and then the use case that we have in mind of Slim CI runs, Slim continuous integration runs. There's a milestone to check out named Marian Anderson, a changelog in the dev Marian Anderson branch, as well as a migration guide that you can look at on a slightly different website. It's next.docs.getdbt.com. I know that's a lot of dots. This is different from our standard doc site. Reason being, we don't want to put features or changes that are coming in a pre-release or not yet officially released out onto the main doc site, confuse anybody who's using a fully released version. But so for anybody who is intrepid and ready to try out things that are actively in development, check out that website. There should be a little pop-up banner to warn you, hey, you're doing cool stuff. Be aware. Let's try to get right into it. So anybody on the call, you can wave or thumbs up or however, familiar with this adapter macro pattern. Writing this word adapter macro and then passing it the name of a macro and a list of arguments that then would resolve to either this like default double underscore or the name of an adapter of a database double underscore. Does this ring any bells for people? Yeah, where have you maybe seen this before? Okay, there's a hint. I gave it away. Yeah, so this is something we do all the time in dbt utils. If you haven't seen this before, I don't blame you. It's not really ever been documented. I think I documented it for the first time when I also announced its deprecation, which is in the next release. This is something that worked up to a point. It was a little bit of a hack, but it allowed us to do exactly what's pictured here, which is datediff has three separate implementations or three ways of writing basically the same thing on different databases. We need to get the difference between two dates or timestamps or date times, depending on the database you're on, all the time to do things like build date spines or any other logic that we want to level on top of that. So rather than over and over and over again having like, here's the macro you should use on Postgres, here's the macro you should use on Redshift, and doing that for every single level of abstraction, we can just code up a macro like this. It will automatically sort of pick out the right implementation based on the database you're using. The real trick here is, and it's a very exciting, very good problem to have, there are more and more community-supported plugins, community-supported database adapters beyond the core four that dbt has historically shipped with. And there's no great answer for how to add the Spark version of datediff or the Presto version or the Athena and Exasol and SQL Server and Netezza and Azure and Synapse, and we could go on. And definitely the answer is not encouraging all of those people to open PRs against the same repository, against the dbt utils repository. We just knew it wasn't going to be scalable and it wasn't going to work well long term. This is something that has been possible, the creation of community-supported adapter plugins since March of 2019, and it's something that we've seen increasing in frequency and in usage a lot in the months since then. So what we have done instead is similar in some ways, but with a crucial difference. There's a new adapter method called dispatch, which will explicitly take a macro name as its argument and a list of packages to attempt to dispatch it into, to look for implementations of this macro, as well as the set of arguments to then pass that into that macro. So we can now write in dbt utils all the same Postgres version, Redshift version, BigQuery version, default version, but then in your project or in another package that you would layer on top of dbt utils, kind of as like the intermediary translation, someone can implement Spark datediff or Presto datediff or all of these other versions of the macro. Again, if this is not something that has ever been a pain point for you, fantastic. This should change almost nothing. But for all of the people who are maintainers or users of community-supported plugins, which is a population that we only see increasing, this is a huge, huge lift, because there are some databases that don't allow things we assumed would be true across any SQL syntax, and the need to override that behavior has become more and more apparent. Oh, interesting. That's okay. So why now? As I was saying, more and more users of community-supported adapters and more community-supported adapter plugins to be using. And what does this get us? It's hard to say right now, but frankly, there are organizations which don't use one of Postgres, Redshift, Snowflake, BigQuery, and can't for whatever structural, political, historical reasons. So getting better and better support for dbt and for the analytics engineering viewpoint at those organizations which need to or want to use other adapters. A more robust open source community. We've learned a lot about how our adapter plugins work because of the very generous contributions and issues and observant problem solving by members of the Spark and Presto communities. I think that's going to only keep happening. And then, honestly, there's functionality that just doesn't exist on the core 4 databases, which may exist in a better form on other database plugins. And we want to make those plugins more and more equal citizens, equal parts of this world, which looks like, although no promises here, lots of caveats and red flags, the possibility to run other dbt plugins, other database types in dbt cloud, hopefully by Q4 of this year. Any questions about this so far? Yeah, it's true. This is not something that is going to be too important to any average user, but it's going to be a big, big help to anyone who uses or benefits from community-supported plugins. So I'm just going to stick to this. Another big reason that we're doing this is it was one of the many things that we've had on our list and on our minds for the road to 1.0ing, maybe later this year, maybe beginning of next year. Again, stay tuned. There's still a lot of things that we need to work on, but with every single minor version, with every single release that we're going to be taking on over the next several months, we're going to peel off 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 items from this 1.0 roadmap. Adapter, macros, and dispatch were the one that we hit in version 18. All right. Anders, do you mind asking your question? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, so I'm thinking, like, since technically SQL Server and Synapse, we've been stuck on 15, kind of waiting for some pieces of 18 to come out, given that there's some refactoring that we'll need to do, right? I think Michael has hit most of the refactoring already, but is there any just quick one-off, here's the change that you need to make? Or my understanding is that there isn't actually adapter-specific macro changes. It's really just how the core package finds the macros.
Yeah, that's right. And adapter macros are not actually breaking in version 18. There's still support for them. But it's a deprecation warning, and we're going to plan on breaking them in a future version.
Got it. Okay.
As you can probably see here, the change is not massive. Really, we just swap out adapter macro and then call adapter dispatch instead. The big, big difference here is the ability to provide an explicit list of packages, or, and this is how we're going to do this for dbt utils, I think, a variable that people can override in their own projects to say, hey, instead of first looking in dbt utils for the implementation of dbt-utils.datediff, I actually want you to look in my Spark utils package instead. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. But yeah. So hopefully everybody feels comfortable and is on board with what is a very foundational change, but should impact almost no one's life? Thumbs up. All right, let's move on to things that might impact your lives a little bit more every day. And that's new and advanced node selection methods. So this is something that we've noticed for a very long time and pushed off longer and longer, which is, DBT projects get bigger. Just doing DBT run every single time doesn't work anymore. Just DBT run, okay, I'm going to tag the models that I want to run in this subset, and then I'll have a different tag for this other subset. Hopefully I'll never need to find like the intersection between them or really complex set differences. Yeah, this doesn't scale super well with projects that are into the hundreds or thousands of models. So we are introducing in version 0.18 new selector methods, the ability to select based on config properties of nodes, test type and test name, this being schema or data tests, this being I only want to run my unique tests, my not null tests, my accepted values tests, my custom not empty where value test, whatever it might be. An even more explicit package selector, this we're going to talk about in a second. The ability to select intersections of multiple selector methods. So it's a new operator. It's a comma on the CLI. And to be able to select, rather than all parents or all children, in an arbitrary numeric depth of, I only want the third parent or the grandchild of this model, but no further. So this makes possible all of the selector syntax that you're seeing here. You can say, I only want to list my incremental models, or I only want to run models defined in the snowplow package that are also incremental. Notice the comma for the intersect here. I only want to run their immediate offspring, so just one layer further along. Or, because this works for tests just as well, I only want to test models that are downstream of my stripe data, excluding any tests that are only worn severity. Of course, because there's only two severity types, I could equally write this with an intersect. Yeah, same sort of thing. So there are going to be a number of ways where there's more than one way to peel a potato. Claire taught me that one. So there's going to be a little bit of mileage varying, and you should figure out what makes most sense to you, like which syntactical expression is going to be the clearest. This is supported in the docs as well. Very cool. So you can write all of the same complex stuff that we had there. In this case, what was I writing? Something along the lines of like, okay, only incremental models in the snowplow package. Yeah. And I hope some of you are already thinking in the back of your minds, great, I'm going to have deployments that instead of looking like dbt deps, then dbt seed, then dbt run, then dbt test, it's going to be like these over and over and over, and like 12 of them, and all of these extremely bespoke subsets that someone has written, and I just have to hope that some other dbt developer manages to write it the same way. Or, we start keeping more magic files in our shared drives of all the selectors that you just need to keep in the back of your pocket. Well, we have a feature as well in 0.18, though do notice my caveat here, I'll say a little bit about that later on, of YAML-defined selectors. So in addition to being able to write this more complex selection logic on the CLI with like commas and stars and colons and all these other like magical incantations, you can also just express it as YAML, which we all know to be the worst way to express configuration logic except for all the others. In this case, my snowplow incrementals plus ones, wouldn't dare leave plus ones out of the party, is an intersection between all of my incremental models that are also in the snowplow package with child depth of 1. And then on the command line, instead of having to recreate and regurgitate this logic over and over with CLI syntax, I can just do all the same things with my selector flag. I'll have a little bit more to say later on about why, like what beta feature means, why we're calling this a beta feature. For now, I'll just say this is something I feel good about, but the syntax here is maybe a little odd, and there are certainly errors and warnings and guardrails that we can give over time to make this easier to use. For now, it's a little bit of use at your own risk, but also to your own benefit. Okay, I'm checking chat right now. Oh, Leonardo, just you wait. Okay, can we do this in dev but pointing to an upstream prod table? Oh my God, we're getting there. Project is, so Project, do you mind asking your question aloud?
Yeah, so if I'm developing on my local, right, I would need, I mean, obviously in my database, I will have a dev tables as well. So when I want to test a model, do I still need to run the entire upstream in my dev tables, or is there a way to point out to an upstream prod table and test just that model?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to get there in just a couple of slides. Thanks for asking aloud and setting me up for it, though. Excellent foreshadowing. It's almost like you were a plant. I'll say, so the other question that I saw, is there an easy way to select models that depend only on source A, but not on any other sources? We don't yet have that kind of like regex style selector syntax. I think it would be really tricky to implement and also to think about. But if you know what all your sources are, you could certainly say like dbt run my source plus exclude all my other sources plus, I suppose.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind. I was just trying to make sure I didn't miss something obvious.
Totally. And it's a chore to write that on the CLI, but part of the hope of the YAML selectors is like things that are a chore to write over and over, you can encode once, write it in a more verbose form, like a little more readable, and also crucially save it in version control and share it with all of your colleagues.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have an okay answer for you, not a cool answer. This brings me to, and thank you for the awesome question setting this up, a little bit about artifacts and metadata. Can someone or everyone like raise your hand, chat in, however, indicate, have you ever played around with some of the artifacts that dbt produces as part of its runs or tests? Or, you know, everyone I imagine has looked at the auto-generated documentation, so that's actually powered by these artifacts as well. Okay. Every single time you invoke dbt to do something like run or test or compile or docs generate, it'll produce one or more of a manifest, a catalog, a set of run results, and then a set of sources, like source freshness. And so there's these questions that have been in our heads for like 6 or more months. What if you could compare your current manifest and a previous manifest to see which models, which nodes are new or changed? Or examine previous run results to see which models failed to build, so you could just like pick up from failures. Compare your manifest and maybe also your catalog to see what's still in the database in my analytics schemas that is no longer actually defined in my dbt project. Now I'm setting the frame here out quite a ways. These are long-lived issues in the dbt repo. These are not things that are coming in version 18, but the foundational work that we're doing here is what's going to make that possible. And that foundational work is going to make a version of state comparison possible. So that brings me to our next very exciting beta feature, state-based selectors, state-based selection methods. The ability to, if supplied with a path to, like any file path, to a set of artifacts from a different dbt invocation, figure out what nodes are new and what nodes are modified. And then you could imagine wanting to run all parents and children and parents of children of any new or modified model. Now, there are pieces of this that are still a little bit in progress. We're thinking about splitting out each of these criteria into its own subselector, so that if you do and here's my caveat, tricky environment-aware things where you have a source that has one database representation in development, but then a different database representation in production, that would be a false positive when we go to compare state. I can say a little bit more about that. I don't want to get too into the weeds, but like if you have a lot of Jinja logic in your YAML files that looks like stripe_dev if target name equals dev else stripe, when we go to compare state between two different manifests, that's going to flag as a difference, even though it's not a difference that you technically made, right, in development. It's not something you actually changed in your project. So these are all knobs. These are things that we're still playing around with a little bit, but broadly, this is going to be possible in the release candidate to come. The ability to identify all nodes that have been modified by comparing artifacts, by comparing manifests, and run only those nodes. Okay, I have to imagine there are questions about this, but my chat went somewhere. So, Leonardo, comparing manifests from different Git branches, can you say a little bit about what you mean?
Yeah, so the thing is that, for example, as you can imagine, our developers are using a development branch, and it would be very nice to compare which models have changed between master and branch, because this could be very useful in our CI integration, because we could run our CI checks just on the models that have changed. And if we connect the dots and we just run a portion of our DAG, and also we use the production data as upstream, then we can really do wonderful things with 0.18.
I agree that that would be great. And in 3 slides, I'll tell you just how great it is. Yeah, no, I mean, that's exactly where I'm coming from as well. And I see someone said, yeah, if dbt Cloud CI could benefit from this. Again, sort of to come. That's part of how this is a beta feature, but that's absolutely the plan. There was one other question. Dan, is that also your question? Like how to diff across environments, like different Git branches? Or was it more about the like, if target this dynamic Jinja stuff?
Yeah, no, that was more just about, I guess for us, we've got a CI environment in dbt Cloud and then a sort of production environment. So even if, yeah, dbt Cloud had some kind of functionality where you could work out a diff and decide what to run, that'd be amazing. But I love it even just as it is.
Yeah. Okay, I'm totally there with you. So again, I'll just say everybody, like caveat, if you do very clever, very interesting things with environment-based Jinja for setting configuration, there are pieces of this that are going to appear as false positives, and you will end up running slightly more models than you maybe expect. We're going to try to give you some power and some leverage over that. But okay, in the meantime, totally, that's where we want to go. You just need to be able to pass a path to artifacts via this state flag or an equivalent environment variable. If you have, a lot of power over your deployment environment, you're running an Airflow, you have the ability to just like find or grab the right files from S3 somewhere or from storage elsewhere and be able to say like, this is where the manifest is that I want to compare against. Great. You're able to do this. Okay, this is half of a very powerful equation. I'm going to try to show you the whole equation in a minute. The other half that we see is, great, this @ symbol is going to run all the parents of my modified models, all the parents of any children of my modified models. If I only make a change, if I only modify one final model, that still has to run a bunch of stuff. That's still a pretty hefty CI job. What if, and there was a question about this just a moment ago, there were some way to defer the references of that final model to another namespace where its parents already exist? Whoops. Thank you. So when we change a final model development, must we build all of its unaffected parents? Obviously a rhetorical question. There are ways to do this today. You could probably write your own Jinja macro that like loops over all references, all parents, I don't know, and just like run a copy or a select star from Snowflake has a much better answer around zero-copy cloning. But if you're not on Snowflake, or even if you are, you might be interested to learn a little more about this deferral. So let's say I've got a model dim customers that selects from stage customers and stage orders, which then indirectly select from our classic Jaffle Shop customers and orders. In the conventional model, if I just go to run dim customers, it is going to presume the existence of its parents of stage customers and stage orders in my schema. So unless I've built those models first, this is just going to fail, and it's going to be a bad time. I can build those models first. Maybe it's a lot of extra work. Given that I haven't made any changes to those models, might I be able to instead just select from the analytics version, from the production version of those models? Yes, if I pass this defer flag, again, with also passing state, with telling DBT, here is the manifest, here is the artifact to go look at to figure out the namespace that these nodes exist in that other environment, in the production environment. Okay, I just said a whole lot of words. Cool. Any questions about deferral in particular? James, I totally take your comment about using like a git diff instead.
Yeah, it was a workaround. This seems better. So for this bit, I'll ask a question of this. So basically you need access to your production manifest to be able to do that, or is it just the credentials, or the profile, or what?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way we envision it is you would be able to access like a production manifest as a file somewhere, whether it's in storage or downloaded from, again, somewhere in the universe where you are controlling your own deployment, right? Like in the universe where you're using Airflow or Jenkins or so on. You could also, if you had credentials for, say, the production environment or the right like target name and the right schema name, you could just compile. Exactly. And that's what I've been doing to test this myself, just like compile prod manifest, then probably not as much of a guarantee, like you're hoping that you replicate the logic of your deployment exactly. But yeah, that's totally an option here.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So the state path to artifacts, is that the path to the artifact in the DBT cloud that we need to specify in the production environment?
So DBT cloud is going to be a little bit of a different story, and it's also to come. But I mentioned earlier that these are flags you can pass. They are also environment variables that you can set. And again, while this is not in existence yet, I believe the plan is there's going to be UI components in DBT Cloud that allow you to pick a production job, and Cloud will just figure out the environment variables for you. So you'll basically be able to say, like, I want to compare against the latest artifacts from prod run, from incremental daily good one, whatever it may be. We'll figure out how to find that artifact and how to surface it in a way that you just get to type the cool stuff. Maybe defer, state modified,
awesome.
That sort of thing. Yep. So, okay, I'm seeing a lot of, good questions. It's true. The trick here is you do need to persist artifacts somewhere. Maybe it doesn't look like persisting the container that you ran DBT in. Maybe it just looks like putting it in file storage in some organized way. Yep. So the goal here, and I know everyone has seen this a mile away, the goal here is a slim continuous integration build that enables you to run only the models, only the nodes that have changed, and their children without needing to first build all of their parents. And this is not the first office hours where someone has talked about faster CI approaches. It's been a very popular topic over the last little bit. there have been some really, really cool approaches up till now that leverage Git or leverage other ways of identifying changes. DBT doesn't, we can't totally assume that you're operating in a Git environment or that we have access to some of that information. That also doesn't have a great answer for things like making changes to dbt-project.yaml, right? Like, did I change a config on one model? Did I change the entire project? Who knows, play it safe, run the whole thing. We, again, are gonna do our very, very best to figure out which are actually the models whose configuration was affected by this change. Okay, so now that I've made some big, big promises, there's not a catch per se, but I have been throwing around some Greek letters up till now. And when I say beta feature, I mean the ground here is pretty new. We're trying to break new ground and hopefully not break anything in the process. The foundation is stable. The way I've told you it works is the way that we want it to work, but there are going to be some rough edges. The error messages may not be as nice as we would want them to be for features that have been fully shipped and out for a long time. Some of the syntax maybe doesn't go as far as we want it to. And there are some final pieces that are still to come. So for instance, YAML selectors not yet available to display in the DBT docs site. I mentioned earlier, like some of the YAML errors could probably be a little nicer. We want to do some work around identifying modifications to macros and variables as well. That is hard. And we're committed to it, but it's hard. So it's not going to come in version 18. Instead, we're just going to give you a little warning if you change a macro that says, we know you changed this macro, there's nothing we can do about it just yet. And there's some hard things to think about, like deferring tests. Maybe some models, but not others, depending on whether you've selected them or they exist in your namespace, or I don't know. But we're not going to say that these are prerequisites for having some really compelling features on our hands. And just because these things are not yet supported doesn't mean we want to put something really powerful into all of your hands now, or sooner, I should say. Though it does mean that there are things very much on the horizon for 0.19 around solidifying all these beta features, maybe some more work around complex workflows and ways to version control workflows in addition to just selectors, even more updates to make our artifacts more reliable, easy to use, consistent across them. So there are some changes to run results that we proposed. If you are someone who has written a ton of code, or like a lot of Python helper scripts that parse and benefit from the artifacts that DBT produces today, I would love, love, love you to check out some of these issues and some of these proposals, because they probably do represent breaking changes for your scripts, but hopefully in a positive way, in a way that's going to make them more usable and more consumable going forward. And there's plenty of other thinking we're doing around how to better leverage all of our artifacts and metadata, especially in DBT Cloud, where we do have persistent storage. So like, how are your models exposed downstream? I don't know. I know I've said it a lot this whole presentation, but stay tuned. That's all I've got. Questions?
Yeah, question, I think, Jeremy, for both you and, well, I think for the whole Fishtown team.
Sure, Josh.
Everybody doing development. So, I mean, DBT is already a very powerful tool, and it's becoming even more powerful. But one of the challenges, I think, with software projects is every new feature you add, you have to think about how it impacts all existing features. And as the number of existing features grows linearly, like the thinking about the impact and the interrelationship of them grows geometrically. Is it becoming more challenging, like, to add and modify DBT and think how, features like these impact everything, or to some extent, I mean, slowing down innovation or development is not exactly the right phrase, but is every time you have to move more and more and more altogether, is that kind of impacting your timeline, your thinking? Is that becoming more challenging?
That's such a good question. I think 0.18 tells this story pretty well, which is the first 10 minutes of this presentation, I think, was a lot of people with eyes maybe glazed over, hearing about a foundational change that we've wanted to make for a long time that should have absolutely no impact on end users whatsoever. And that's a lot, frankly, of what's going to be part of this 1.0 process. It's like there are tiny edge cases that are not possible today, and it's for foundational reasons that we've long wanted to change. And the immediate impacts are not going to be obvious. They're not going to feel like a huge win. So these are things that we've scoped out a long time ago, know we've needed to do, have a pretty good feeling for what the repercussions are going to be. Then there's things that we've wanted to give people for a very long time. We haven't had the chance to suss out every possible implication or repercussion or test case. We hope that you all can, I hope you all can help with that. And so I want to be able to pair giving everybody structural change that is going to be good for the long term with compelling new features that are only going to be refined over time. But I take that point really well. The matrix of interactions between like deferral and DBT-LS and the exclude flag, and like these are all things that we've had to grapple with. And there are going to be times where we come up with a really elegant solution. Like I'm hopeful that this breakdown is going to be one of those. Whoops. There are also times where we are going to have to punt on some of the harder questions and figure out how people actually want to use this before I or someone else comes up with a solution in advance.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Josh. Does anybody want to weigh in chat and say that these are really bad changes and that they don't get you anything that you want? Counterpoint? Or is anybody concerned about anything? Yeah, Tegan, I think that's a great point. We have an answer that I feel pretty good about for dbt Cloud. Again, forthcoming. I'm going to be really curious to hear how this impacts the ways that people deploy dbt via Airflow, or this is probably another point in the favor of an orchestration tool rather than a cron job that runs in a box that disappears after 20 minutes. Which, I mean, has always been kind of true, but it's true. It makes it even harder to just like spin up an arbitrary machine and not care about state at all. There are very few things that dbt cares about state for. I think historically the answer has been snapshots and nothing else. And now the answer is like snapshots and nothing else unless you want this really cool additional functionality.
Hey, Jeremy, I have a quick question. You might indulge me. Can you talk a little bit about the state modified .macros piece and sort of why that's not coming in v0.18 and maybe what our broad thinking might be for the future?
Yeah, so it's funny how these things sort of intersect, because there wasn't a plan for us to, it wasn't planned in advance that we would align thinking about state with thinking about things like adapter macros, and there's no obvious reason that they connect. But the old way of doing this, here we go, would do something to the effect of you like pass a macro, dbt in Jinja takes that macro, tries to prepend it with the name of your database, and then search in the Jinja context to see like, does that macro exist? It's really hard to know what the answer to that is in advance. So it was a little bit like throwing a ball into a very shadowy room and just like hopefully some dark figure throws it back to you and you catch it. You're like, great, I got the right version of dateDiff. But if someone made a change to one of those implementations or to the adapter macro, there would have been like no way to know ahead of time, oh, there was a change made to that macro. and here are the affected models because they actually depend on BigQuery date diff. So there's some like pretty low level work that we need to do to make sure that the list of macros each model depends on, which is right now written to the manifest, but it's not 100% reliable, to making that actually reliable and something that we can know in advance of running those models. Because for this state modified step to work, we need to know which models are modified before we've called and run the whole thing.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Just a quick follow-up question. It does sound like dbt is going to start using sort of manifests more significantly as state storage. Are there any kind of like shortcomings in the artifacts that dbt produces today? And are you thinking at all about maybe how they might change in the future? And can anyone maybe on this video call contribute some thinking around if they're using these artifacts and how?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear from anyone on the call who does that today. I'll just say that the ones that we have in mind right now are making the run results a little more rational so that, for instance, there aren't separate fields for like error and fail, if I remember correctly, like status and results, making sure that there are some common metadata properties and like schemas and versions, like real JSON schemas for these things that anyone could inspect and reliably depend on. But yeah, is there anyone on the call who has written some cool code to parse the manifest?
Yeah, I like we use the manifest file a lot. Actually, Drew first pointed me to it like a couple months ago, and it was really helpful. And we primarily use it sort of vet tests on different things for our CI. So we need to ensure that models have valid descriptions and also that they have like the adequate number of tests and the adequate type of tests. So maybe like just throwing like out a Hail Mary like product feature request, like a global setting for certain things of this would be like really helpful, that you could set in a project and it would catch models and stuff automatically that fail those criteria that you set globally.
Yeah, that's a cool thought. I know there's a very long-lived feature around like test coverage. Like dbt should be able to tell me that all my models are tested or some percentage. And I mean, I want to be hesitant about defining things on behalf of everyone that you may want to define differently. But yeah, making those kinds of calculations or checks a little more user-friendly is a really good point. Also, if you have more tests than you have models, what does it mean to have 300% test coverage, right? Yeah, Mikhail has a cool test coverage package. Nice, thank you, Jamal. All right, so once again, we are planning to have a release candidate for this very, very soon. In the meantime, you can check out the next.docs.getdbt.com website. In particular, I'd recommend going to the 0.18.0 like migration guide, though because this is in pre-release, it's really just an overview of all the things that are new and links to the docs that have changed. Some of these docs are a little more thorough than others. Some are things I added this morning just so that there would be links here, but that's all going to be more and more thorough over the coming weeks as we go through the release candidate cycle. All right. Team, do you want to? Yeah, there it is. Nice. Feel free to hang out. I've got 8 minutes. Anything that's on your mind about 0.18, about anything else? Yeah, true. Mitchell, thank you for saying it. Thanks to everybody else, all of our community contributors to 0.18 as well. There's a whole bunch of features and iterative improvements that I didn't mention in this presentation, but which are also going to be very cool, like the addition of supplying an IAM profile for Redshift connections, impersonate service account in BigQuery profiles. I know there's one other BigQuery change. Oh yeah, policy tags to BigQuery columns. So there's some cool little things coming, and I'm always, if you are someone who is thinking about picking up a good first issue and contributing and seeing your name on a future DBT release, feel free to honestly reach out to me, or GitHub does have pretty good, or we've been pretty good about keeping labels on these things. So surfacing these like good first issues. Bastian, is that the, it's with an E?
What?
Is it with an E as you spell it?
My name?
No, artifacts.
Oh, I think there is a British and an American spelling, potentially.
Okay, that could be.
Yeah, so I kind of go between the two, and I don't know which one is what, or if maybe I'm completely wrong, who knows?
There was a version of this presentation that involved me making a joke about the Mirrodin block in Magic the Gathering, but we just decided not to go there out of our better judgment. Kevin Sanchez, will 0.18 let us run only tests that are set to warning severity? 100%, that is true. It will be possible to run only your tests that are set to warn, or equivalently, the inverse, to only run tests that are set to error. Oh, nice. I mean, not nice. I don't want you to cry. Yeah, so severity is technically a config on test nodes. And so that would look just like config severity warn.
So the grammarist says artifact with an E is a British spelling.
Okay. I'll accept that. One tiny semi-interesting detail sort of related to that, I talk about, oh gosh, where is it? The difference between new and modified for comparing state, and modified just includes everything new as well. But schema tests almost always are new if you change a schema test. If you change, I had unique on this column and then I moved it to this other column, that's actually a different schema test now. Or it was unique, now it's not null. That's just a straight up different schema test. So those things are always going to be new. The only way in which that's not true is severity. Severity is a config on an existing schema test. So if you change from severity warn to severity error, or vice versa, that would actually be a modified, a config modification. A lot of those details will be in the documentation. I had fun thinking about that. It has almost no tangible effect whatsoever on how you're going to use it.
This is pretty niche, but is there any chance these selectors might make their way into generating DBT docs for a subset of models? For example, if you wanted to just serve the documentation for your customer marts in a static site.
Drew, do you want to take that one? Just because.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. I think, Jericho, can you pull up the YAML-based selectors in this
I was
deck?
Gonna do it.
Yeah.
Oh wait, do you want in this deck or the issue?
I think just whatever is fine. So we have the ability to define selectors, and you can sort of programmatically run every model matched by those selectors. That's kind of how it's going to work today. In the future, I think it'd be really interesting to consider these selectors as sort of lenses into which to view the documentation. So if you do select a set of models, maybe there's also an opportunity for you to say configure your build of the docs, where you say use this selector and I'm going to hand wave this because our thinking's still pretty nascent here, but show me only the database representation and not the sort of folder structure based representation, or like hide the data sources, or in the future, like this is an often requested feature, we want to build out an ERD visualization for how your models relate to each other based on relationships tests. You can imagine saying like hide the DAG, show the ERDs, and being able to like sort of tailor the version of the documentation that you give to different stakeholders. So that's all super nascent, but the part of it that's relevant today is kind of like, I think selectors are going to be a key piece of this. We're going to find like, here's what I want to see in the documentation.
Yeah, and that's a piece of why, in addition to the fact that we couldn't do it, that's part of why we chose not to surface YAML selectors in docs just yet, because I think we could make some very cool decisions there of how we want that to work beyond just like one more button in that already pretty cluttered DAG-viz.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, it's a great question. With the very last minute I have, I'll just say, I hope you all will help out and do your part, which you can do by installing the pre-release candidate or the release candidate once we have it. One thing I've noticed, lots of people like installing dbt utils. That's great. For good reasons, we've set an upper bound on the supported dbt versions in dbt utils to prevent any sort of like unexpected breaking changes for people who just always pin or install the latest version. So when you try out my release candidate, not if, but when, you may need to pass a flag, that's missing a dash, but no version check. Just two. Ooh.